All right. Okay, so let's get rolling. So we're going to talk today about the Agile Process Owner. And I love this quote. We live in a moment of history where change is so speeded up that we begin to see the present only when it is already disappearing. I don't know about you all, but I'm not sure how we got to November. Just, so just in life, things are moving quickly these days. When you think about the IT industry and would dramatic changes have occurred as a result of the internet, cloud-based computing, mobile computing, how dramatically things change all the time. It's kind of no wonder we all on any given day aren't quite sure what's going on around us. Here's one of the things that's really fascinating about this particular quote. Artie Lang, who was a psychiatrist, actually died 25 years ago. So if we think we're feeling overwhelmed with the pace of change today, or I guess I should say if he felt overwhelmed with the pace of change in his day and age, think how we feel today. So when we talk about this notion of agility, and I'm going to first talk about the notion of an agile enterprise. Every enterprise today, whether you're in the private sector, whether you're in the public sector and striving to achieve the mission of your agency, we all have to move faster today. We have to be flexible. We have to be willing and ready and able to respond when priorities change, when we face challenges. And that requires good policies and good processes. If you look at organizations that are reaping the benefits of practices like DevOps practices and Agile software development practices, those organizations aren't getting there because they are throwing out all of their processes. And there's sometimes that misperception that, if we want to move quickly, we can't have processes. That's not the case. Having said that, we can't move quickly if we have overly rigorous processes. If we have processes that are bloated, that are bureaucratic, we've got to make sure that our processes are designed to provide just enough control in order to support the aims of your organization and to enable you to move as quickly as the business requirements demand. Now, all of us are involved in processes in some way, shape, or form. Many of you are involved in multiple processes over the course of your day. You change hats constantly. You may be working on incidents 1 minute, handling changes another minute. Deming actually said, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. You're just kind of floundering around. So why is the notion of processes so particularly challenging for IT organizations? We all understand, I think, that concept of agility and that need to focus on speed and change. But when it comes to IT, who cares if you're moving quickly, if you're, wreaking chaos in the production environment every time you make changes? With IT organizations, we also have to focus on stability. The ops side of an IT organization is held accountable for the availability, for the security, for the capacity, for the continuity of the production environment. So achieving that balance and also achieving good quality services that are truly of value to the business is really challenging. But at the end of the day, that's what the business wants. They want all of the above. They want speed, they want stability, and they want quality. So agile thinking and agile practices are really helping us to get there. We're seeing phenomenal improvements in IT organizations, especially those that are adopting, for example, DevOps practices. So who is responsible or who is accountable for ensuring that these processes work effectively? Well, Deming actually said, hold everybody accountable. That's ridiculous. And sometimes we actually say things like, when everybody's in charge, nobody's in charge, right? At the end of the day, it is a process owner that is accountable for the performance of a process and for making sure that process delivers value. Now, anybody who's been involved in creating racing matrices, which map roles and responsibilities to process activities that A stands for accountable. So a RACI matrix is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Who plays what role within a process? Those of you familiar with RACI matrices know there's only ever one accountable. So the process owner, when it comes to process performance, is where the buck stops, so to speak. The process owner has a lot of responsibilities, and one of the things that's really important to understand is that those responsibilities may change over time. You may find that initially the process owner is very, very hands-on in all of these different areas, but as the process matures, as we maybe have a process manager who's really capable of taking over the day-to-day responsibilities in terms of the process owner may move more to process sponsorship. Process sponsorship is really about setting the policies, setting the scope of the process, what falls within the boundaries of that process, and really, most importantly, making sure that the strategies associated with that process are in line with the overall strategies of the organization. And here's where we have to think about things like the risk profile of the organization, perhaps the industry that the organization is in, and how what the organization has to be doing in order to compete in that industry. Are we in a position where we've really got to speed up dramatically? Time to market, for example, has become a significant focus in order for the organization to be competitive. So, all of those factors like, risk and cost and quality all contribute to the strategy that we put forth for our process and how we want that process to perform. Part of process sponsorship is also just representing the needs of all of the process stakeholders. And really, no matter where they are in the organization, and increasingly today, even if they are outside of our organization, many processes today in the world of cloud computing span over into other organizations. Process resourcing involves, of course, making sure that we have all of those stakeholder groups represented, but a lot of what a process owner does is get out there and work with line managers to make sure that the line managers that have their teams represented when we're undertaking process design and improvement initiatives, that process managers or line managers are allocating significant resources to execute the process itself. And also, a process owner works with the line managers to make sure their people get the training that they need, not only in terms of the process itself, but any technologies that may be associated with that particular process. Process design and improvement is really overseeing the initial design of the process and making sure that, again, all stakeholders are represented in those design activities, and then for the long run, making sure that needed improvements are being made. Process management is really about setting objectives, setting performance measures, overseeing those performance measures. Here's where a process manager is really important. A process manager is typically overseeing the day-to-day activities. So process owner isn't necessarily running reports and analyzing those reports. Rather, he or she is looking at and kind of analyzing a dashboard or higher level sets of data that enable them to understand how the process is performing. And then certainly awareness in terms of communicating how the process is performing, and also serving as a single point of contact relative to that process. So process owner has a very, very wide range of responsibilities. Again, initially, a process owner needs to be very, very hands-on and interacting with the process improvement teams in order to make sure that all of these activities are occurring. In time, he or she may delegate some of these activities to a process manager and really focus on that process sponsorship, that higher level role of making sure that the process is staying aligned with organizational strategies. One of the things that is important when we talk about processes is really understanding and ensuring that the process is working seamlessly end to end across functional areas. I mean, I think that's one of the things that really distinguishes a process, is that it may span many, many different functional areas within an organization, and we want to make sure that those processes aren't a burden to those different functional areas, and that the process is executing very, very seamlessly across those departments. So a process owner really has to have a really broad understanding of what's going on in the organization. Not only, and it's very common for a process owner to be a manager or a director in a particular department or division within the organization, but really to be effective, he or she has to understand the higher level organizational strategies and goals. So whether it relates to, that process owner's division or department, they still have to understand, because they have to interact with other managers, they have to interact with other directors, and not be making process-related decisions that are going to be potentially detrimental to other people within the organization. They have to understand the process itself and really be a subject matter expert in that particular process. It was very exciting to me that a lot of you said that your process owners are certified in their particular process. They really should be. They should be very much aware of best practices, tools, other practices like Agile and Lean practices that they can use. They have to have this really big, robust toolkit that they can use in order to ensure the process is efficient and as effective as possible. I think a really important litmus test for a process owner is also how well they understand related and interfacing processes. A process will never be as effective as it possibly can, or as mature as it possibly can, until it's interfacing effectively with other processes. So a good process owner has good relationships with other process owners and works together with other process owners to make sure that all of the processes are performing as well as they can be, and really understanding that sometimes when it comes to process improvement, it may not even be about the process owner's process itself. It may be about how that process interfaces with some other process, whether in terms of how it takes input from another process or how it provides output or information to another process. So again, big, broad range of knowledge, and there also has to be a level of authority for a process owner to be effective. They've got to have the authority to get out and enlist resources and to actually take action in order to make improvements and enable the process to work as effectively as it possibly can. And this has to be an ongoing process. This is not in any way, shape, or form. And I think this is where a lot of times we make mistakes with processes. We implement, and I'm using little air quotes here, we implement a process, and then we think that process is done. Well, hopefully DevOps has taught everybody that technological changes can occur and new practices can emerge that really require us to completely rethink and perhaps re-engineer our processes so that they're not serving as a bottleneck or a constraint within the IT value stream. And if you look at the skills and attributes that a process owner needs to have, I almost kind of wanted to add to this slide, like able to leap tall buildings, right? Because, there's a lot of, first of all, soft skills that are needed in order to be an effective process owner. There's a lot of communication, collaboration type activities that a process owner needs to undertake. But they also really do need to be very process and outcome oriented. Sometimes you would think they need to be a little bit left brain, they need to be a little bit of a logical thinker, but really it's quite the opposite. That notion of being logical is important, but today process owners have to be very creative. They have to constantly be thinking out of the box, so to speak, in terms of how we can, in fact, meet the needs of our organization. You may have regulatory controls you have to comply with. You have higher level organizational policies you have to comply with. So a process owner has to really have the ability to kind of think creatively in order to understand how best to stay within, that governance structure, to operate within that governance structure, but also have a free-flowing and efficient process. And some of that also may just involve getting out there and negotiating changes to some of those higher level policies. They have to be really passionate. They have to be really excited about how we can improve this process and how we can make sure that that process is delivering value. So really, how do processes deliver value? Well, first of all, they deliver value by enabling the organization to work together seamlessly from end to end. So here's where the notion of a process working across functional areas within the organization, enabling those different areas within the organization to work together is really invaluable. If you look at the Agile Manifesto, it says we value processes and tools over, we value people and interaction, over processes and tools. And that doesn't mean that processes and tools aren't important. What it means is that enabling people to collaborate is what's really important. Enabling people to work effectively together. So a good process enables that from end to end across the entire value stream. A good process focuses on outcomes as opposed to outputs. I did a presentation recently and I asked the audience what an outcome of the incident management process was, and everybody kind of very quickly said restore service as quickly as possible. And one of the things I said to them is, well, let's go beyond that. Let's go beyond just restoring service and talk about what that really provides in terms of a business benefit. So an outcome, for example, of the incident management process is to give productivity back to the business, to enable people to get back to their jobs and do what they need to be doing in the context of their part of the business. So a process owner has to think beyond, right, and really understand the end result that's really desired and how that result benefits the business. Effective integration with other processes, I've talked about that before. Adapting to feedback and changing needs. If you've ever been in a situation where you've complained to a company about their process, perhaps you had difficulty getting a hold of them, or you found that their policies were really difficult to understand or weren't really satisfying your needs, you either got a sense that they cared about your feedback and thanked you for that feedback and were willing to make changes based on that feedback, or, and I actually heard this from a service provider once, the person told me that I was like the 20th person that had complained about that day. It was kind of like get in line with everybody else. So in this stage, we have to listen to our customers, and really let's all understand that our customers can be out there talking on Twitter, right, and kind of telling the world about how we're doing. So we have to get very, very good. A process owner has to be very good at listening to what customers are saying. And then also making sure that we're doing things in a way that's meaningful to our customers. When we think about it in the context of processes, today people want processes that are pretty lightweight. People want to be able to have processes that are technology enabled. Kind of the good old days of a big standard operating procedures manual is fairly obsolete. We want to hop onto our mobile phone, we want to be able to click a couple of buttons, and we want to be able to, trigger a process or get information about a process. So we really do have to understand, right, what's really important to our customers in order to ensure that our processes are delivering value. Now, when we talk about a process owner, I want to spend a minute and talk about the fact that there are other related roles, certainly. I've talked about the process manager a little bit. Within your organizations, you may have in place value stream owners, and typically a value stream spans over multiple processes. There are process architects and process design engineers. So there are a lot of different roles associated with process design and improvement. But specific to the role of a process owner, very often we see this notion of a service management office. And the idea of a service management office in the context of IT service management is that we're coordinating all of the processes and all of the functions throughout their life cycle. So typically process owners report and very often it's a dotted line report, into a service management office, and that service management office works together to ensure that all of the processes are aligned with the organization's strategies and goals. One of the things I've introduced before in many other presentations, I'm sure you can find presentations out there, is the idea of doing a prioritization matrix to really look at what are the challenges that we're facing, what are the perhaps pain points that our customers are experiencing, and then let's rate what processes would enable us to respond to that challenge or alleviate that pain point for our customers. That implies all of the process owners working together and thinking about the greater good in terms of the overall enterprise and in terms of their customers, and not just kind of putting their blinders on any given day and thinking about only their particular process. You know, it's really important to understand that process owners on any given day can make a change that could negatively affect other processes because we're no longer producing the information we need to, or we're not producing it in the time frame we need to. So there has to be strong collaboration and cooperation between all of the process owners within an organization, and typically that happens within a service management office. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to stand up a separate department and all the process owners report into that service management office. It doesn't have to be that formal. It actually can simply be a community of practice. It can be a working group within your organization, whatever you call, right, that activity that enables the teaming of people in order to ensure that whatever they're doing supports the organization's needs. So please don't turn the service management office into a them versus us type of situation where the service management office kind of sits up on high and dictates down to everybody else what they need to be doing. Really, an effective process owner very much has the finger on the pulse of what's going on in the organization and is, again, communicating and collaborating on an ongoing basis with other process owners so that everybody's thinking about, you know, how can we do the right thing? How can we make it easy for people to follow these processes? Now, when we think about Agile planning, very often we have this kind of higher level vision for where we want to go in IT service management. We talk about the overall IT service management strategy, and a lot of times that comes with a roadmap and perhaps a series of changes in the form of releases that we want to undertake in order to move forward on that roadmap. And that's really where this service management officer, this working group of people, can come into play to set that higher level vision and then provide that insight to process improvement teams who are actually then working on individual processes on a day-to-day basis to, you know, either design those processes or improve those processes as needed. And notice that our process owners are involved in all of those activities. So very, very important ongoing engagement. Now, in the context of Agile, the process owner plays a very, very important role. You know, a lot of you mentioned that you are using Agile processes, Agile practices in the context of design and improvement. 7% of you said majority of your projects you're using Agile design and improvement practices. 15% of you said that some of your projects, and 41% of you said you're just getting started using Agile. But Agile lends itself to any type of project, and it lends itself in particular to a process design and improvement project. Now, I'm not going to do, you know, a Scrum 101 session here. There's plenty of sessions available that talk to you about Scrum, but I do want to talk about Scrum in the context of an Agile process owner. In Scrum, there are three primary roles: a product owner, a Scrum Master, and the team itself. In the context of software development, it would be the software development team. In the context of Agile Service Management, and Agile Service Management is really about adapting Scrum practices to process design and improvement projects, we have similar roles. We have the operational equivalent to a Scrum product owner, and that is our Agile process owner. There is a role called the Agile Service Manager, who's the operational equivalent of a Scrum Master. And then we have a team as well. And that team in this case is a process improvement team, the team of stakeholders from across all the different functional areas in the business who are engaged in designing and improving that process. In Scrum, the product owner, and I'm going to from this point forward refer to the Agile Process Owner, is responsible for maintaining and managing the requirements of the process and maintaining those in something called a process backlog. If we were talking about software development, we would talk about a product backlog. So our process backlog has our requirements for all of our stakeholders, and the iterative approach we use to design and improve a process says, let's understand what's most important in terms of requirements. Let's pull out those highest level items, those most important items first, work on those, typically within a time-boxed period referred to as a sprint. Sprints are typically 2 to 4 weeks, and produce, as a result of that sprint, what's called a potentially releasable process increment. Now notice the word potentially there. We may not release this process increment, but if it makes sense, for example, maybe if we just need to make a small change to a process in order to improve its performance, we may go ahead and release that process increment. What Agile Service Management does, and what using a methodology like Scrum does in the context of process design and improvement, is enable you to chunk up your process. So rather than doing what we historically do with processes, which is we go through this long exercise to make sure we understand everybody's requirements, then we make sure that we design the end-to-end process in such a way that it's going to satisfy everybody's requirements, and then we put out typically a massive process definition document and get everybody's approval on that document, and then we try to implement that whole entire process in all its, glory, all at one time. Can be really overwhelming for organizations. This is where organizations really start to feel a little bit of change fatigue, because especially if we've got multiple process initiatives going on at the same time. So Agile Service Management says, let's chunk that up. Let's start looking at adopting the notion in software development. There's this notion of minimum viable product. What's the most pared down version of a product that we can produce? Let's think about that same concept in the context of process design and improvement. Let's look at what are the minimum critical activities that I need to have in place, and then over time expand upon that process. So let me give you a very simple example of how that might work. You may say, okay, let's first of all look at a very basic change management process. Let's look at standard changes. These are pretty low-risk changes. Perhaps they can be pre-approved. We have some pretty minimum requirements associated with them. Let's make sure we can answer questions like, what changed, who made the change, when did it get changed, right? Let's have a really simple record of the fact that something has changed. Most folks can kind of understand those minimum critical activities and see the value in those activities. The next iteration of the change may start to look at, okay, what if we have a more complex change? What if we have a change that's going to affect more stakeholders? What if we have a change that's higher risk? Here's where we may start talking about, for example, engaging, getting line manager approval, or perhaps even having a change advisory board that needs to approve that change. But rather than having a process that has to cross every T and dot every I right out of the gate, let's think about this notion of minimum critical activities and then grow the process over time. We almost never back up, right? We implement maybe these bloated processes or overly bureaucratic processes, and we almost never take away. We almost never thin the process down. It's just kind of the nature of the way we operate in IT organizations. So let's not start there, right? Let's start with those minimum critical activities. So the process owner, the Agile process owner, is responsible for the process backlog and ensuring that process backlog is visible and it's available to people, and that it's being used continuously to capture the requirements and to order or prioritize the requirements associated with a particular process. Now, some of you may actually have something called a CSI register, and if you do, that's okay. You have the same concept. And actually, a process backlog may actually be a subset of your CSI register. Typically, CSI registers in the ITIL context have all of the changes associated with all of your processes and all of your IT service management tools. So we're talking here about a subset in the context of a particular process. The aim of a process backlog is really not to try to define all of the requirements in great detail up front. Same concept as with Agile software development. In Agile software development, they don't write these very comprehensive requirements definition documents. They might capture very, very broad requirements, which are often referred to as epics. It's like just some big, broad topic area. They may use, and we can use in process design and improvement as well, user stories. User stories say, as a, I want so that I can, right? So it has kind of a who, what, why concept in terms of collecting those requirements. And a theme is simply put a collection of user stories. So these same practices that are very often being used by Agile software development teams in order to capture requirements for a product can be used to capture requirements for a process, and then to also, provide an order or a priority in terms of how those requirements need to be satisfied. So remember, those minimum critical activities, those highest priority activities are what you're going to be working on in your current sprint or perhaps your next couple of sprints. Then you may have other requirements that you're going to address as part of your current release. And remember, we talked about the notion of Agile planning in terms of having that roadmap, and within that roadmap defining what those releases are. And then we may have some things that are on the list, but they're just big items that we know about, and we don't want them to be forgotten about, but they're low priority, so we really don't have to spend any time and effort right now really defining in detail what these big items are all about. Let's just put them on the list, even if only in the simple user story form, as a, I want to, so that I, right? It can be on a Post-it note. Let's capture that simple requirement so it doesn't get lost or forgotten, but let's not spend any more time on it until we get to the point where we're starting to think about pulling that requirement into a current sprint. And then we're going to start adding greater detail, having those conversations to make sure the requirement is understood, and really figuring out how we're going to actually satisfy that particular requirement. Now, for a lot of you, you may actually have multiple backlogs that you're dealing with. So there might be a backlog for your IT service management program overall. This may be a product of your service management office in terms of setting, right, that high-level roadmap and that high-level strategy for your processes. I talked about your process backlog, and then you may also have a product backlog for whatever the product is that you're using in order to support your processes. So those of you that are using, ServiceNow or, Service Center, all of the different IT service management products that are available today that underpin your processes, it's very likely that you have a product backlog, and even if you don't call it that, somewhere along the line you've got a list of stuff people want to have done, right? A list of changes that people want done relative to that product. So give some thought to how you can bring these concepts together so that, again, our process owners are always kind of collaborating and working together and thinking about the greater good in terms of how we're ordering our requirements and satisfying those requirements. And this is difficult sometimes. Every process owner wants their process to be the center of attention and to be the process that gets focused on first. But remember, every process has a relationship with every other process. So there may be changes that need to be made to some interfacing process that will really benefit you a lot, and it may be to your advantage as a process owner to let those changes be made, let those changes go to the front of the list so that you can then reap the benefits of those changes somewhere downstream. So we want to make sure that we're taking an iterative approach, and that's what sprints are really all about. Sprints really say, let's chunk up our process design activities, and you know, more and more I'm hearing organizations say, our leadership really wants us to show progress. They don't want us to go away for 6 months and then come out with this, what we think is perfect process, implement that perfect process, and then start, you know, in all honesty, hearing everybody complain about it. They want to see progress. So it really is to everyone's advantage in this day and age to figure out ways to chunk up their work. And it really makes sense in the context of process design and improvement because it enables us to have a little bit of a cadence, to have a little bit of a rhythm in terms of how we undertake those activities. We can also really just be very open and honest about what we're doing. We can demonstrate to the stakeholders of our process, to the leadership within our organization, what we've been doing. We can solicit feedback on a process increment instead of, again, waiting until we have that big comprehensive document that's sometimes hard for people to wade through. And here's the really good news. We can very, very quickly adapt based on that feedback. So rather than waiting to have the process actually in execution to get that feedback, we can get that feedback based on a demonstration, maybe in the form of a process flow, or maybe in the form of perhaps if our process is tool-enabled, a demonstration of the tool that supports that process, get that feedback and then adapt before you actually start to try to shift the culture and change the behaviors of everybody who is a stakeholder in that particular process. You also, by chunking up your process design activities, provide just enough detail to start to trigger development activities. You know, I talked about the notion of, you know, Service Center or ServiceNow, whatever is the product you're using. A lot of times the folks who are involved in configuring those tools, and hopefully you're not customizing those tools anymore, but if you are customizing those tools, a lot of times they kind of have to wait while all the process design work is done, and then they can start doing the work on the tool. And that's not changing. You know, we still have the no rules before the tools philosophy of life. When it comes to IT service management, I always say if you're doing things wrong and you automate them, you'll do them wrong faster. that notion hasn't changed at all. But we do have the ability with sprints to take this very iterative approach. So we may, for example, look at an activity within a process. We can use our user stories to represent the requirements of all of the people who are stakeholders in that particular activity. We can work through those user stories, make sure that we design that activity and the procedures associated with that activity on paper. That's the process part, right? We can then trigger the tool-related configurations that support that particular part of the process. So now we're starting to see that rhythm. Now we're starting to get that momentum that enables us to take this very iterative and incremental approach to designing and improving the process. We're showing progress all along the way. We're enabling collaboration between the people who are the process stakeholders and the people who are the technology stakeholders in that particular process. And again, we're able to show progress much, much more quickly. We're able to reap the benefits of Agile development methodologies. So Deming said, the aim of leadership should be to improve the performance of man and machine. I'm going to cut him a break. Since he was born in the 1900s, I actually adapted his quote to say, we want to improve the performance of woman and machine. But this notion of having technology-enabled processes has existed for a long time. And so we really do have to make sure that we have that integration between process and tool. One of the other mistakes we make sometimes with process design and improvement is we create this great process on paper, and then we never quite getting around to configuring or making sure that the tool does fully support the process itself. I find sometimes where the technology actually gets in the way of the process performing as smoothly as it needs to be. Now, a lot of that's changed because today many of the tools were actually designed to work with frameworks like the IT infrastructure library. Many of the tools are very, very configurable, so the days of having to customize and kind of develop or program tools has really gone out of fashion. You know, it's much, much easier to make simple configuration changes and rule changes that enable your tool to support the process. And that's really at the end what we want to do. Like Deming said, we really want to enable people to be proud of the work they do, to work as efficiently as they possibly can, to, you know, increase their output and not get in the way of them doing good work. So the process increment is really the outcome of that sprint, and we want to think about, again, that word potentially, releasable process increment. You have to give some thought to, is this increment in a usable condition? Is it something that we could execute as a standalone item? Remember that we may release a process increment, but we may not. There's lots of things that we have to consider. But one of the things that you can be looking at is the relationship between not only the improvement activities that are occurring within a process, but we can also think about interfacing processes as well. So we have this opportunity to kind of very incrementally look at improving our process, getting feedback on how that process is performing before we move on to make the next round of changes. This is plan, do, check, act in its absolute purest form, is it not? If you think about from the standpoint of the Deming cycle. So let's undertake the next increment of improvement, you know, get that feedback as well. And you also have the ability to, again, look at interfacing processes and make sure and start to kind of build the relationship to see, all right, if we could have a better problem management process by better integrating it with our incident management process, right? Can we in fact do that, right? Are there changes that we need to make to incident management, as an example, that would enable problem management to move on to the next level of maturity? Perhaps we haven't been doing some particular activity within problem management up until now because we're not getting the data that we need from incident management, as an example. So you really, again, can start to have this bigger picture perspective and understanding of how changes to one process integrate with and potentially affect other processes. So what are some of the things we need to think about in terms of whether or not we would release a process increment? Well, of course, always, is the organization really ready and receptive to this particular change? A lot of times we see where there's something else going on in the business. Perhaps, you know, it's a particular time of year, or there are some other big initiatives going on, and everybody's, you know, absorbed. Everybody's consumed by some other higher priority projects, and that's never a good time to introduce process-related changes. Could we potentially confuse process practitioners because maybe this increment can stand alone? Maybe we have to make sure that we have multiple increments before the changes will really start to make sense to the practitioners associated with that process. Or people will start to think, well, hold on, you know, I understand that this is going to get us there, but when are we going to get there, right? A lot of times people want to know that the thing that's really causing them pain is in fact being addressed, and sometimes making incremental changes just makes it feel like we're not listening and hearing what they are saying is really the pain point. Making sure our dependencies are done, any, perhaps changes that need to be made to interfacing processes. Could we cause change fatigue? Change fatigue is kind of that like collective sigh that people feel when we make changes. It's like the rolling of the eyes, like, oh gosh, here we go again. Sometimes organizations call it framework fatigue. We're trying to make so many changes that people have lost sight of why we're doing this. And people will start to say things like, wait, hold on, why are we doing this? Does that mean what we've done up until now hasn't been worthwhile? If you look at the IT organizations that are successful today, they're leveraging Agile practices and Lean practices and IT Service Management practices and DevOps practices. So everything that you've done up until now has enabled you one step after another on your continuous improvement journey, but you have to message all of those changes properly. Otherwise, people will start to feel that change fatigue. And at the kind of big bottom line, the increment has to really deliver value. Deming says we always have to focus on the why we job. Let's never forget about what our overall organizational strategies are, what the overall goals of the organization, what's happening in our industry, what we need to be doing to be competitive, how we can better support the mission of our agency. Let's not forget why we're doing all of this stuff. Here's where we always want to make sure as process owners that we're focusing on the outcomes of our particular process. So realizing the value of a process really requires a couple of things. Making sure the process is aligned with business needs. And in this day and age, every process out there needs to be looked at to see how it can be made leaner, how we can eliminate waste, how we can eliminate wait time, how we can eliminate unnecessary approvals that we may have in our process. How can we make sure that we have just enough control in place within our process to really support and meet the needs of our business? And we also have to make sure that the process is sustainable. So we can't have a process that is so bloated and so bureaucratic that it's getting in the way of people doing their real jobs. We want to make sure that processes make it really, really easy for people to do the right thing, to do whatever it is that process aims to do. And selecting the right process owners with the right level of authority and influence is really critical to making sure that that value is fully realized. The process owner role is an invaluable role, especially in this day and age where every organization is being challenged to look at each and every process within their organization and figure out ways to improve the value that's being delivered. So Deming once said, experience by itself teaches nothing. And I love this quote. And, he goes on to say, experience doesn't give you any context. It doesn't help you do any, ask questions or make comparisons. How are we performing, for example, relative to best practices? So into all of our lives must come a little theory, and without that theory, there is no learning. So in that spirit, let's talk a little bit about the types of educational opportunities that we have available, and then we're going to get to what I always consider the most fun part of making a presentation, and that is answering your questions. So, Eric, are you out there? And Eric, you've got yourself muted.
I just unmuted myself. How are you doing today, Donna?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Thanks so much for doing this webinar here with us today.
Thank you.
It was really a fantastic webinar, and I'd like to say what kind of hit the nail on the head for me were the real world considerations to release a process increment. I think so many times we lose sight of the how in our pursuit of why. Let's change this because it's going to give us a boost in speed, mobility, control, etc. But wait, now our practitioners have no clue what's going on. Ultimately, that's going to slow us down. I just absolutely love how you laid it out. And so I've been really excited for this webinar because it's kind of the banner for our new class, Certified Agile Process Owner. we kind of did a test class a little while ago, and people were raving about it, saying that they needed their whole teams to be certified in it. And I've been waiting for this webinar to kind of push it out to the masses and say that we've got a class coming up on January 19th. It's going to be huge. It's already filling up, and I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to join us. Just because of how awesome Donna is, it's inspired me to give everybody on this webinar a 20% off coupon for Capo. So what you're going to do is there's going to be a link. You can go on to itsmacademy.com and you just go into the search, and you're going to search for Capo, and go ahead and just pick the date there on January 19th. I know who you are, so if you register, I'll be sure to get you that 20% off coupon, and we'll have a code emailed out to you, as well as just kind of a reminder. And Donna, again, I can't thank you enough for joining us today and giving us this knowledge, and just making the world a better place with it.
I'm happy to do that. So who's been collecting questions? Do we have questions? Thank you, Eric.
No problem. Actually, I have one of the questions here. Karen, I didn't know if you wanted to say the questions, but I got one here from Greg Arnholt, and it says, can you equate the Scrum Master and the Product Owner and the team to the Process Owner, the SMO, and the team? How does that map?
Well, I wouldn't. Yes, I would equate the Product Owner and the Process Owner. So we view the Agile Process Owner as the operational equivalent to the Product Owner when you talk about pure Scrum. They manage the requirements, they own the the product backlog, right? All of the same kind of conceptually, they have the relationship with the customers, conceptually the same types of activities between the Process Owner and the Product Owner. I'm just going to use this slide just because it's kind of here and handy. We relate the Scrum Master role. Sorry. Come on, play nice with me. Here we go. There we go. We relate the Scrum Master role to the Certified Agile Service Manager role. One of our other offerings is called CASM, Certified Agile Service Manager. So that looks at and adapts the Scrum Master role to Agile Service Management. And part of what a Scrum Master does, for anybody who's not familiar with the role, they really make sure everyone understands the Scrum methodology, that the team understands how to work in terms of working within sprints, how to do things like sprint planning, how to decide, and establish your definition of done for an increment. The SMO, in the context of, I would say, pure Scrum, doesn't really have a role. The concept of an SMO is really an IT service management concept, but I have to say, in Scrum, you do sometimes use the term Scrum of Scrums, and that's where kind of Scrum Masters tend to come together and kind of work together if we've got multiple sprints going on that have multiple Scrum Masters associated with them. So conceptually, the idea is there in Scrum, but the SMO is really something that's more in the context of IT service management and process design and improvement in particular. And then both have the concept of teams, right? So both have three roles, the third role being the team. In a Scrum, true, pure Scrum environment, it would be a software development team, and in the context of Agile Service Management, it would be a process improvement team. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Donna. That was a very large question, and thank you, Greg, for putting that in. I don't have any other questions at the moment, but I do have several more announcements for you. And so while I'm doing that, if you would chat in any other questions that you have for Donna, because she is so knowledgeable about this this topic and very passionate about it, so she's ready for you. For those of you that do need to drop off, I'd just like to remind you that due to the holidays, there will not be a December webinar. We at ITSM Academy would like to wish you all the very happiest of holidays And we'll see you in January and look forward to having you join us then. And we'll continue to bring you practitioner presentations discussing Agile and IT service management implementation experiences and challenges. People want to hear and learn from the practitioner experiences. If you would like to share your implementation experience or your implementation challenges with us and with our audience, please let us know. We'd be happy to work with you and make that happen for you at one of our monthly webcations. And I don't have any other questions at this time, Donna. I do.
Well, that was
wait,
too easy.
I do. They just came in. Here's a question for you. How many times, this is from Lisa. Did you see that? How many times did Donna say
So I have to like just clue everybody in. I did a presentation recently, and a couple of my coworkers teased me that they were going to make a drinking game out of how many times I said Deming in the course of a presentation. So I actually decided with this presentation to have a little fun with them in that respect. So hope my coworkers are still standing out there, but just trying to have. I do love Deming, and I do quote Deming in every presentation, but just wanted to have a little fun with this one.
That was funny. And they're great quotes.
Lisa, hope it made you laugh.
I have a question from Marie, and she's saying in the Agile Service Management slide, what does the 24 hours represent?
So in pure Scrum, and if you're kind of not familiar with Scrum, I have to tell you, just like Google's like Scrum in 10 minutes or something. There are a lot of good presentations out there that kind of very quickly give you an overview of Scrum. But typically with Scrum, there is, one of the kind of premises of Agile development is time boxing things. So we hear this notion of a sprint, and sprints are typically time boxed to 2 to 4 week increments. In a lot of organizations, 2-week increments work really, really well. Think about it, in 4 weeks in a month, that's kind of a long time to potentially be going in the wrong direction. So, but that's a conversation for another day. But this notion of 24 hours, in Scrum, there is this concept of a daily stand-up. And in the daily stand-up, the team comes together very quickly, no more than 15 minutes, and answers 3 questions. What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? And are there any impediments on my way? It's a fundamental part of the transparency that that enables organizations to move quickly, making sure, and I'm sure some of you have been in projects where somebody's been struggling, but they haven't told anybody about it until it was too late. So we really want to make sure that through those daily stand-ups, everyone is working on whatever they're supposed to be working on as a member of your process improvement team. So that's where the 24 hours comes into play, that every 24 hours you do a stand-up and you account for what progress you're making in the context of the sprint. And all of the process improvement team members participate in that daily stand-up.
Great. Thank you, Donna. She
Mm-hmm.
had a question, so I just wanted to kind of say it out to the group just in case anybody missed it at the beginning. Yes, you all do have a copy of this presentation available to you. It's available to you either in the chat, there's a link in there for it, or you can go directly to our website at www.itsmacademy.com/webinar-archives, and you can download it there.